My brothers and sisters, and my beloved confreres, a very hearty welcome to each one of you to this recollection talk, wherein we shall try to reflect a bit more consciously about our lives, tallying it with the life of Jesus. I'm very sure during these days of Lent, we had been on a recollective mood. We spent time on reflecting as to how we should become a mirror towards others. The figures in the Bible stand out before us to reflect and replicate on us our own personalities. And we had been reflecting on some of those important personalities in the Bible who can make difference in our life so that we can become like Jesus in our lifestyle. As we are entering into the intensive time of the Lent, wherein a conscious effort is to be made in order to understand the person of Christ and see our real life situations in accordance with the values of the gospel, I would closely invite you to go with me to understand Jesus as someone who is accused of various mistakes. Especially the Holy Week, is a time for us to have a retrospection on ourselves and to see how the person of Christ can stimulate still a new sense of purpose in each one of us. Shall we journey with Jesus, the accused, the one who is considered to be a glutton, a lawbreaker, a wine drinker, a friend of the Beelzebul, a friend of prostitutes and tax collectors, a madman? We shall go with him and see how Jesus addresses these accusations with a sense of still conscience and a sense of purpose. Yes, my brothers and sisters, one of the most painful situations in the life of a human being is to be accused of something. All the more, when one is innocent, accusations become so acute to face with. Many of the youngsters think of suicide as the only solution when he or she is accused. Many of the grown-ups shut themselves out from the public contact when they are accused of something that is very serious. Each one would like to safeguard his or her name, the so-called good name. And I believe it's only natural that we react, that we return actions and reactions in order to defend ourselves from such accusations. They say even the animals like to be understood. This is exactly what happens even when our dogs are accused of something at home. They are domesticated animals. Many of the times we see these dogs do not even eat food when the master is angry with it. There's a beautiful legend told about Saint Jerome. As most of you might know, Saint Jerome is always presented with the picture of a lion lying at his feet. Once, as Jerome was in the monastery, a lion came to the monastery, roaring aloud, very aggressive. Hearing the sound of the roaring lion, most of the monks in the monasteries hid themselves. But Jerome went out and looked at the lion and saw there was a thorn in the paw of this lion. Jerome, in all his kindness, took the thorn out, and the lion was so happy. To that extent, it became so friendly with everyone in the monastery and got domesticated. The one responsibility that was given to this lion was to accompany one of the monks who was going to the forest with a donkey to collect the firewood. Every day, the lion would accompany this monk and the donkey into the forest. One day, unfortunately, the donkey was found missing. Everyone's eyes turned towards the lion, and they said, the lion killed the donkey. The lion was so sad. It was shedding its tears, and it awaited for its turn to find who took the donkey away. In its alertness, the lion found that the donkey was stolen by the dacoits. The lion chased the dacoits, and all these dacoits took shelter in the monastery. Saint Jerome told the monks not to harm the dacoits. He came towards the lion, and the legend goes like this. The lion sat near Saint Jerome, shedding tears. Yes, my brothers and sisters, even a domesticated animal needs understanding. Then what about us human beings? This is where I would like to turn to the person of Christ. And I would like to ask you the question. When people accuse you of one or the other thing, who is your reference point? I believe it should be the person of Christ. If you travel through the Gospels, you would find there are 6 main accusations raised against the person of Christ. He was accused of various things that he did and he said. But each time, Jesus stands up and asks a fundamental question back. Who among you can accuse me of sin? I believe that was the voice of his conscience. Even when everyone accused him, he considered that merely as a drop of ink falling on his clothing. Naturally, removable. He was never affected in his conscience. His integrity was never touched. Yes, my brothers and sisters, when accusations of various levels are leveled against us, we should have a reference point, the person of Christ. When oppositions and accusations put us down, we should understand we need to look at the person of Christ and tally our lives with that of Jesus' life. Shall we travel with Jesus to see what are those 6 accusations against him and try to see our understanding of our own lives? My brothers and sisters, one of the most commonly raised accusations against the person of Christ is that he is a glutton. You must always remember, this accusation is raised against a person who fasted 40 days at the very beginning of his public ministry. This accusation is raised against a person who resisted a drink when he was very thirsty as he was dying on the cross. In spite of all that, Jesus is accused of being a glutton. I just wonder, what is the problem in eating food? If you look into the Gospels, you would find one very interesting thing. Jesus is presented as participating in at least 40 banquets. Most of the time, we consider banquets and celebrations as not part of our spirituality. For us, spirituality means only fasting. But for Jesus, celebrating the food was one of the most important aspects of human relationship and sharing. And that is precisely also the reason he was always gratefully handling a meal. Even the very sacrament of the Eucharist is a sign of that gratitude with which he celebrated the meal with his fellow beings. I believe the person of Christ is not a glutton, but a man who understood the meaning of sharing a meal. But why this accusation? Very often we find this accusation arose because Jesus was merely a wanderer. For him, the meal was the sign of the gratitude of someone else's hard work. He did participate in that meal with a sense of gratitude. He needed a meal. Think of 13 young men, Jesus and 12 of his disciples who were wanderers. They had no other option than to accept the invitations of others to have a day's meal. That's why the Gospels loudly pronounce each time when Jesus took up the bread, he said a word of thanksgiving. Yes, my brothers and sisters, meal for Jesus was a time of celebration. Meal is a sign of relationship and reconciliation. At the same time, it was a means of his own personal sustenance. He was never a glutton, but instead a man of gratitude. This is exactly one of the approaches that we need to have towards sharing the meal in the context of our community, in the context of our families. Do we share it with a sense of gratitude? Is hunger something that we feel or something that we think that we are having? The only one who feels hungry knows the need of a meal. Most of us eat because it is time to eat, but Jesus ate because he felt hungry. The second accusation that was raised against the person of Christ was that he was a wine drinker. Naturally, this accusation came in order to show that he did not lead an ascetic way of life as done by his contemporary John the Baptist. For Jesus, drinking wine was a sign of joy and a joyful life. Very often, my brothers and sisters, we give a melancholic tone to spirituality. For us, to be serious, to be dismal, and to be sad is the sign of spirituality. To most of our own gurus and masters, we put such a picture on their face and say, he is very serious, therefore he is spiritual. Jesus understood an immediate happiness can never replace the joy of life. I remember a beautiful story told about a Buddhist monk. As he was walking through the streets, he saw a group of children playing hide and seek. He went and joined the children, and he played with them. To that extent, he involved himself fully with the children's game. He went and hid himself under a heap of hay. Children went around searching for him, and they did not find him. Finally, they went home, but this monk was hiding under the hay. Following day morning, a milkman came and was removing the hay to give to his cow, and he found the monk hiding inside the hay. And he asked, "Master, what are you doing here?" Then the monk told him, "Do not make sound. Those fellows will come and catch me." Look at the light-mindedness and the total involvement of such a spiritual giant. People who took life in a different way. Jesus really liked to celebrate life. For him, celebrating life was not being non-spiritual, but in fact, it was a question of being spiritual and enjoying life with others. And that's precisely the reason he could generate a sense of belongingness, a sense of joy into the life of those people who came in contact with him. Are we joyful in our lifestyle? Or are we looking for a momentary happiness that is not, in fact, lasting? Joy is like the source of water, whereas happiness is merely water. Are we joyful people like Jesus? When people accuse us of being too serious, we need to have a replication of our own lives in the light of the person of Christ and ask ourselves the question, am I a joyful person like Jesus? Yes, my brothers and sisters, yet another accusation that we find about the person of Christ in the Gospels is that he is a friend of the tax collectors and prostitutes. Yes, the sickness of the mind is sin. Very often, we consider people as sinful and abominable because we find their way of life unacceptable for us. What do we do with our children when we rear them up? We tell them very clearly, do not be in the company of bad people. My brothers and sisters, I would like to tell you one thing. If you think that your children are so good, they should be able to influence the community and the surrounding in which they live. They should be able to show the other that they are not on the right track. Therefore, we must be able to generate a sense of orderliness through our good way of life. And that's where I look at the person of Christ. It's a truth that many of these people who were considered to be sinners, Gentiles, tax collectors, were the people who accompanied Jesus the most. And they found solace and consolation in his presence. They never bent their head because of their past. They understood they are following someone who can hold them close to his heart and make them healed of all their sicknesses. I believe sinfulness is the sickness of the mind. Once the mind is polluted, we consider all other things as wrong. And that's exactly the judgmental attitude that we make towards others. Let's look at the early church or the first Christian community. What kind of people were the members of these communities? Most of them were poor people. People who were rid of possessions. People who were accused of various sicknesses and sinful lifestyle. And they came to Jesus to be purified. Very often we say that the church is meant for holy people. I remember a young man telling a parish priest when the parish priest told him to come to the church. Looking at his own life, who was at that time a drug addict, unaccepted by his family and the society, this young man told the parish priest, "Oh, the church? That's all meant for the holy people." This is where I am startled. When did the church become the place of the holy people? The church should be a place of purification and not the place of the purified. And that is exactly what Jesus says. Only those who are sick need the physician and not those who are healthy. Let us make our churches places of purification. That should be the place where all varieties of people gather together to praise God. When the so-called sinners and the unwanted come to the church, that's the time heaven rejoices. Heaven rejoices because there is joy in relationship with one another. Yet another prominent accusation that we find against Jesus is that he is a lawbreaker. Very often, he was considered to be a person who broke the Sabbath. And the Pharisees and the Sadducees had hell of time with Jesus because he was not obeying the Mosaic laws and regulations. It is true, laws are made for human beings. Human beings are not made for laws. Yes, my brothers and sisters, you would notice one thing in the life of Jesus. Jesus never broke a commandment. He broke the so-called traditions which were outdated, which were inhuman. And this is exactly what is happening in the life of the church. Very often, we hold high the traditions to that extent, commandments are sidelined. The commandment of God, love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself, is above everyone and every other law. Therefore, Jesus made sure the love of God and love of neighbor are upheld in and through his person. Traditions are human made, but commandments are made by God. What do we obey today? I just look at Pope Francis and some of his lifestyle. I'm so touched by that discernment and decision that he made to wash the feet of women who were even non-Christians on Maundy Thursday. And that made a lot of furore even among the clergy. People ask the question, how could that ever be? Keeping women away from some of these fundamental rights that they need to access to, we are trying to propagate the ministry of equality. How can it ever be when gender-based differences happen in the history of the church itself? I always think of one thing. Maundy Thursday celebration is not merely washing of the feet. It is the celebration of the institution of the Sacrament of Eucharist, a meal of unity and thanksgiving. Who cannot be present there in this celebration? I always consider Eucharist as a meal. At the time of a meal, whose presence do you most desire? Surely that of your mother, who is a woman. From the birth, suckling her breast, I sustained my life. My food was my mother. Has she not a right to be present in every meal, including the Eucharistic meal, where I share life and energy with one another? Rumbling oppositions against the concept of the philosophy that Jesus proposed is understandable. When people understand their own powers are shaken, they begin with opposition. Let us challenge our own credibility in understanding the difference between laws and commandments. Commandments of God need to be obeyed. Laws are meant for human beings. They need to be obeyed in accordance with the time and the need. Jesus was a lawbreaker, but he broke those laws for the good of the humanity. Yet another accusation that is raised against Jesus in the Gospels is he is a friend of Beelzebul. That means his actions and his words were promoted through satanic power. Very often, this had been the history of Christianity itself. People who showed a sense of sanctity differed in their attitudes, in their words and actions from others. That's why very often we make that statement. It's very difficult to live with a saint. The words of saintly people, people who have seen a further light in their own lives, are different from that of the ordinary people. We need to understand many of the words, actions, and the commitment of Jesus were not understood by the people properly. Later in the history of the church, we find people of holiness were considered to be witches, and they were persecuted, thrown into the furnace, and were killed. When you speak words that are not understandable for the ordinary society, you will be considered to be a friend of the Beelzebul. The question here is, are you ready to be different from the ordinary crowd? A crowd thinks only in terms of sleep, food, and sex. And this attitude of the crowd is felt by all of us in every life situation. Even when you travel by a crowded bus, you find the crowd provoking you. Crowd never thinks in terms of holiness or purity. People of purity, people of sanctity are people who are different. That's why great people say, think different. The moment you begin to think different, many might consider you to be possessed and having satanic power. These rumbling oppositions are merely a passing reality in your life. Jesus stood firm and he communicated. He acts through the power of God and not through the power of Satan. Yet another accusation that was raised against Jesus is that Jesus is mad. He is out of mind. He is someone who is not stable in his thinking. Mad people are always people who behave in a different way. We create an order for the society today. And when someone thinks out of the box and speaks something or does something, he or she is considered mad. Jesus was considered to be mad even by his own brothers. Why not? The reason that they thought that he is mad was because he is not behaving like any of us. Why should a young, handsome man go around like a wanderer, become friend of the fisher folk, sleep at the roadside or in the wilderness? Is he not really mad? Mary had a son. He was not going for work. He is unmarried, unthinkable for that time. And he goes about preaching about a God whose spirituality most of the people never understood. Therefore, they came to catch hold of him, to take him home so that they can give him treatment. To our luck, Jesus did not heed to their whims and fancies. Thanks be to God. Yes, my brothers and sisters, very often madness is a creation of the human beings themselves. Very many people who walk different, live different, are considered mad by us. Mahatma Gandhi was called a half-naked fakir when he understood the difference in thinking. If any of us walk barefoot, people would say he is mad. Your dress style, your hairstyle, your appearance is already designed by the society. And if you do not heed to the whims and fancies of the society, you are mad. Jesus was happy to be mad because he was thinking differently. Yes, my brothers and sisters, there were so many accusations about the person of Christ. But one of the credibility of the person of Christ is that he is a man of integrity. He developed a lot of spirituality, growing in the dirt, but unaffected by the dirt. He was a man of pure conscience. Therefore, these accusations that he is a glutton, that he is a wine drinker, he is a friend of the tax collectors and sinners, he is a friend of Beelzebul, he is a lawbreaker, or he is mad, never affected his person. Many of these accusations helped us to see the sterling characteristics of Jesus' personality. Stand firm. When your conscience is pure, your inner voice will support you to go along the path of Jesus. Especially as we come closer to the Passion Week, the Holy Week, let's be aware the struggles of Jesus are also part of our own lives too. Let us attach them to his cross and tell Jesus, in that empty space behind your cross, I am there with my hands outstretched. Take me along to the glory of God. Amen.